Good afternoon and welcome everyone to BCM Wednesday webinar series. My name is Paul Drinan. I'm the Active Transportation Director here at Bicycle Coalition of Maine. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Bicycle Coalition's mission. Just in case, we specialize in education, advocacy, and encouragement. And I really want to make sure we have enough time to hear from Greg, so I'm not going to read all the words on the page here. I'm sure most of you are familiar with our mission. If you're not, feel free to reach out to us at bikemaine.org. Today, we're pleased to announce Greg Lang. He is the developer and founder of this amazing software we're going to talk about today called Vision Zero Reporting. He has quite an extensive resume, and we're lucky to have him here to talk about something that most people take for granted, and that is just how crashes are portrayed in the media. And Greg really, his work helps not only provide a unique perspective on this, but helps correct what is often misrepresentation and sometimes even blaming of victims in the media. So with that, Greg, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Yeah. Appreciate BCM for inviting me, and I appreciate everyone for being here. Um, I am the software developer of Vision Zero Reporting. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with Vision Zero, which is just this movement to address the systemic nature of car crashes and injuries. It's an understanding that these incidences are systemic in nature. They're caused by underlying factors rather than individual fault. I just have this hunch that the way car crashes and other similar incidents, when I refer to car crashes, I'm also including, bicyclist incidences and pedestrian. So I had this hunch that, these articles I was reading in my local newspaper were misrepresenting um, the systemic nature of what was happening. So you've probably seen headlines or articles written like this. A bicyclist was hit and killed by a car. The car jumped the curb, or even blaming language. So the pedestrian wasn't wearing reflective clothing, or a bicyclist wasn't wearing a helmet. So I felt like there was something wrong. In the city I was living in at the time, this was several years ago, I read a local article where a pedestrian was walking in the roadway and he was hit. Um, and that was pretty much the whole article. But when I dug around and I looked at Google Maps and I looked at the local street, I realized first of all, it was wintertime. And second of all, there are no sidewalks. So of course, the person who's probably getting his mail or something was walking the roadway because all the snow is piled up on the side of the road and there are no sidewalks to begin with. So if you just read the article, you'd walk away with this impression that it was the pedestrian who was at fault without realizing that, there is a systemic problem. The city has not installed sidewalks, so they're setting people up for failure. So, I searched around. Of course, I figured this isn't just isolated to my city. There's probably something bigger going on. And uh, sure enough, just a cursory search, you realize that, there is research on this topic. Um, and this is the main one I found, the editorial patterns of bicyclist and pedestrian crash reporting. This is the research that Vision Zero reporting is primarily based off of, but there are similar studies as well. These authors looked at 200 car crash and pedestrian related articles, and they manually assessed each one to look at certain patterns. And they had a list of patterns. We'll go over that in a future slide. But what we find is both startling but also commonplace is that vulnerable road users, so bicyclists and pedestrians, are almost always the focus of the blame. And when we refer to drivers, they're not actually referred to as drivers and people who have agency and control over the situation, but they're referred to with object-based language, so they're referred to as cars. And then most importantly, only 6% of articles were assessed to be thematic. So there's two types of framing. There's thematic and episodic. Episodic is just a single episode. So a bicyclist was hit and killed, and that's that. A thematic article would be, a journalist is developing the theme of road safety. They're discussing the road infrastructure, safety initiatives, and things like that to paint a bigger picture that these aren't just isolated incidences. These are recurring issues because of the underlying issues. So given my background, I'm a software engineer and I was working in the DoD contracting field at the time, actually specializing in natural language processing. Coincidentally, the stars just aligned where I was able to use my background in software engineering and NLP to build a tool that would basically automate what these authors had previously done with manual effort. I could write a tool that basically automated what they were doing. So just a brief background of NLP. It's a subset of machine learning, and the main goal is to extract information from written text. So you can do a whole lot of things with NLP. We can do information extraction, sentiment analysis, automated translation, and question and answering. And some of you are probably also familiar with large language models and ChatGPT and similar tools today. That's an even more advanced version of NLP, much greater in scope, much larger set of data. The way I wrote this tool was actually pre-ChatGPT. I had to write everything myself and train a custom model.
Greg, before we move on, I'm really fascinated by this NLP process, and especially given the fact that it preceded ChatGPT and other platforms that people might be familiar with today. How long did it take you to create this platform?
Yeah, that's a good question. I took 4 to 6 weeks to develop my own custom model. I was using some off-the-shelf tools, so that of course made it easier. So I didn't have to write everything from scratch, but 4 to 6 weeks, primarily to train a custom model. So not going to get into too many details here, but there's a convolutional neural net that you can train where I had to manually tabulate over 1,000 articles. I found is what gave me enough data to make a model that was accurate enough. So that just involved taking news articles and basically highlighting different sections to saying that's a counterfactual statement or that's a focus issue. But then there is also additional logic layer. So I built some additional code to manage things that the model wouldn't be able to pick up on.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful to provide that extra context.
Mm-hmm. So what we end up with is Vision Zero reporting. If you haven't checked it out yet, it's visionzeroreporting.com. It is an automated tool to detect editorial anti-patterns in car crash articles. There are a few examples on the front page, so if you don't have an article handy, you can just scroll down a bit and click. You can view this example. This is one of them. Las Vegas school incident, and you can see the highlights in the article. So the highlights correspond to different issues that we're looking at, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But if you look at the page, you can scroll down and it will actually explain why these are issues and give you a background, much more detailed background of what's going on. So the editorial anti-patterns are just issues that we're looking for, and these are based on the research. There are 6 main ones, the most important being framing. As I discussed earlier, there are 2 types of framing. There's thematic and episodic. So episodic is just a single episode of an isolated incident, whereas thematic, the journalist is going to develop and discuss trends and statistics that help readers understand the systemic nature behind the car crashes. The second one is counterfactuals. This is a little more nuanced because counterfactuals are true statements, but they're statements that distract readers from properly assigning blame or understanding the systemic nature of the crashes. So a great example of that is a statement like, a bicyclist was hit, he wasn't wearing his helmet. That is a true statement if the bicyclist wasn't wearing a helmet, but that sort of language tends to assign blame to the bicyclist as if it's their fault for being hit in the first place because they're not wearing a helmet. And of course, the article isn't going to discuss whether there are even bike lanes available, or any sort of behavior of the driver. Were they distracted? Were they speeding? Things like that. Other counterfactuals you see are weather-related incidences. Like the roads were wet, as if that's an excuse for not driving properly. Um, Reflective clothing, alcohol usage, road closure, things like that. Another thing we look for is the use of the word accident as opposed to crash. I mean, this is pretty standard, and I think there is a website called crashnotaccident.com, something like that. The word accident just tends to undersell what's happening, and it's not the sort of language we use in the aviation industry. Planes crash, but cars have accidents. Next, there's object-based reference, so referring to cars rather than drivers. It tends to, again, undersell the situation that drivers are responsible and they are the agents, and they do have responsibility, of course. Agency is whether an actor is included at all. So a pedestrian was struck rather than a pedestrian was struck by a driver or by a car. And then the last thing we look at is focus. So who is the subject of the sentence? There's a difference between a bicyclist was hit by a car versus a car hit a bicyclist. And all of these categories are backed by research and language research, not just in the urban and car-related fields, but just in general. There's a lot of research that shows, if the focus of the sentence tends to be the person who receives the blame in cases where there's some sort of negative event. So the Vision Zero reporting does have a few different types of users. So there's researchers, and that's where I started with. So of course, I was building this tool to see if I could automate what I had seen in the research. There are advocates like yourself, safety advocates, bicyclist advocates, and so on. And then there are journalists and reporters, the people who are actually writing the news articles, and people who really control the narrative about how we understand these cases. And then there are several use cases. We can audit individual news articles, and whether you're a researcher, advocate, or journalist. We can make research efforts easier and more comprehensive. So the research that I based this tool off of, they had to manually tabulate 200 articles. That took a lot of effort. And if now we have this tool to do it, we can build a much more comprehensive repository of articles and see different trends. And then ultimately, I hope this tool helps call attention to our understanding of car crashes. Of course, the language really controls our understanding of what's happening. And unfortunately, as we see, the language is just not proper enough. So the takeaways I hope you walk away with are, car crash articles routinely fail to highlight systemic nature of incidences. And then language does shape our collective understanding and reasoning. But most importantly, I do want to call attention to the fact that the language that we use in these car crash related events is very different from how we would do something in aviation or medicine. So in aviation, if a plane goes down, the NTSB investigates. When a car crashes or when a bicyclist is injured, pretty much we just blame the individual and say people just need to do better, and that's that. So why is there such a big discrepancy between a plane crash and a car crash? I posit that a big part of it is just language. It's similar for medicine. So if we could imagine, let's say, a doctor or a nurse let's say gets a patient injured or killed because they administer the wrong medicine or something like that, and they keep doing that, I mean, that would lose their license, and in some cases they can even be charged. Um, so why is it that we can build roads that we know are dangerous? We know these roads are inadequate for bicyclists and pedestrians, and people can get injured and killed over and over again, but nothing happens. Um, Again, I would argue that the baseline is that our language to describe these things and the way these are portrayed in the news just doesn't build collective action and collective understanding um, to properly address the systemic nature. We basically read these news articles and blame individuals and then walk away. So, certainly I hope this tool helps you all in your advocacy efforts. And I would hope that it expands into journalism um, so that we can make a bigger movement and change society's understanding and adopt a Vision Zero approach.
Greg, thanks so much for that. If you want to follow Greg's work or use the tool, you can reach Greg at visionzeroreporting@gmail.com, and you can find the tool at visionzeroreporting.com. So there's also an article here. This webinar has been recorded and will be available to everyone afterward if you want to go back and review this information. What I'd like to do now is stop my screen share and open this up to conversation. But before we do that, I'm really curious. Well, first, let me back up. Greg, I want to thank you because since Bicycle Coalition has learned about your tool, we've put it to use. And it's been very enlightening, not only for us, but some of the local reporters. And what's been fascinating to me is how some reporters are receptive to learning about this and the tool that's available to them. And as you can imagine, or as you probably know, some take offense. And I'm wondering if you may have any personal stories about journalists who have embraced this or have maybe even rejected it.
So I don't have any personal stories of any journalist who has rejected it. I have had a few reach out to me and appreciate the work I've done. And then, the tool isn't perfect, so sometimes they're reaching out to let me know if there are issues. But, um, what I'm finding is that journalists, they are receptive to changing the language. It's just they're either time constrained because news agencies, at least at the local level, just don't have the resources that they used to. The industry is becoming much more consolidated and moving toward national level news. Um, yeah, and also they're working off of material that's put together by police reports. So when a car crash happens, the police are the first to respond. They put together their report. And so any problems or any lack of information in the police report means that the journalist is hampered in their reporting.
And I take it you're a cyclist. I'm really curious as to what prompted you to invest the time and your personal energy and talents into developing this. What inspired you to do this and create this tool for everyone to use?
I think it was just passion. I like reading about topics like suburban sprawl and urban policy. I read Strong Towns. So it was a matter of, can I build this tool? And I felt like I was the right one to do it, so I did.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I lost my screen for a moment. At this point, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Anne is here helping monitor the crowd, so I'm going to look for raised hands. Feel free to turn your camera on or not if you have a question for Greg. And if you don't, I have a few of my own. I think it's no secret that the way crash data is currently assembled is what I consider to be highly flawed. It seems to be that the sole purpose seems to be to assign blame so that insurance companies know who to sue. And so we here at BCM and some stakeholder partners are talking about embarking on some sort of study to figure out how we can put crash data to better use. So instead of having it assign blame, it would become a learning opportunity. I see David has his hand up.
Yes, actually, I don't have a question, just a comment, a statement that might be useful or not, more than just, the reporting. But what happens, so it'll be July where it'll be 6 years since I was hit by an inattentive driver and almost didn't make it. Here in Rockland, I was life flighted to Portland. And the two things that I recall that are consistent with some of what I'm hearing is, one, as I was coming in and out of consciousness, lying on the road, it was either an EMT or a policeman. I don't know, because again, I was coming in and out of consciousness and probably already filled with morphine. But this person said, "Don't I know you? Haven't I seen you before? Haven't you been hit before?" And all I can remember saying, "I don't know what on earth you're talking about." And so there was an assumption that right away that I was, somehow it was my fault as the bicyclist. But then, because we were advised to get a lawyer, and actually there's an excellent bike lawyer in Portland. If anyone's interested, if anyone needs one, I can point you to her. But there was the question of who was at fault in terms of how much was at fault. And the police report was very unhelpful. And if not for the fact that there was a convenience store right at that intersection that had a camera that happened to be pointed at the intersection at the time of the crash, the outcome would have been much different. But then after that came out, it became clear to the insurance companies that I had no fault in the crash at all, that it was the driver's fault. And that plays well into the kinds of thing I think that you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. You saw the statistics from the research paper where, bicyclists and pedestrians are almost always blamed. It's just an unfortunate thing about the way journalists cover these articles. I don't necessarily know how it started, but once it does start, that's just the language they use and they get used to using it and it just keeps propagating. So we definitely need to change that.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Julie Dabowski. I'm the assistant planner in Yarmouth and liaison to the Bike and Ped Committee, and been doing a lot of recent crash analysis for various projects and looking at Maine DOT's public crash query tool, as well as the public map viewer, which has crash statistics as well, and then also going through police reports in order to get more data on local crashes. And I've come across not only, I would say, a dearth of information under contributing actions, but in my past experience at New York City DOT and looking at those police reports, which included details such as, whether it was a left turn, right turn, the type of intersection, I guess in order for both professionals and advocates and the general public to get a better, I guess, that fuller picture that your tool helps to provide. I'm wondering if it includes language, such as those site-specific details, like Amanda mentions, the pedestrian wasn't in a crosswalk when there's no crosswalk available, because that's, we're looking at both systemic crashes in the community and of course statewide, but then also those local patterns that might lead to a left turn traffic calming demonstration project, or daylighting actually with physical infrastructure instead of just bollards because it's not doing anything, or actually doing something more than signage, for example. So I was just wondering if your tool provides that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. So right now the tool is just it audits the language and it highlights problems, but that is a planned concept. What I'd like to do is be able to, take a news article and associate it with the location. So which city is this from? Which state is it from? And build a database that's able to integrate with a mapping tool, let's say Google Maps or something similar, where we're not just highlighting the issues with the article, but actually using geolocation-based information to help the journalist actually fix a language. So what that would look like is you take a news article, you identify the location, even down to the specific intersection, and then maybe we have a tool, a geo-based tool, to help the journalist identify road design patterns. And then we can maybe even include like snippets, like language sentences that they can simply drag and drop into the article based on what's available to us.
That would be great, Greg. I'd love to see that tool expanded to incorporate that. I recently, excuse me, had a conversation with a journalist here in Portland, Maine, about a fatality that occurred in a crosswalk where the vehicle had come to a complete stop at a neighboring street. So the vehicle traveled, what, 20, 25 feet. And so we used your tool. We talked about the story, and then we also both pulled up in real time Google Earth. And I think it was helpful for the reporter to see that context of the intersection, the fact that there were no visual obstructions, lots of daylight. And so the idea of being able to front load this for journalists, I think would be really incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Any other questions from folks? Well, seeing none, I would like to make one last appeal for anyone who's interested in seeing the way crash data is assembled and reported and utilized. Please reach out to us here at BCM. This webinar will be available for people to review shortly. It has been recorded. And thank you all for joining us for this really, for me, it was a really enlightening conversation. Greg, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for your time, and thanks so much for your tool and joining us here at the BCM Wednesday webinar. Any final words, Greg?
I just really appreciate you all for having me. If you have any comments, suggestions, so on, my email is in the slides. So feel free to reach out.
Thanks again, Greg, and thanks again to everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.